overnight, what people may not totally know is the degree to which it appears that Kamala Harris has avoided the rioting inside the convention hall that may match the rioting outside. Has she pretty well got this wrapped up with some delegate wrangling just the last 24 hours?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes, she hasn't wrapped up. The delegates, enough delegates have committed. I just, especially in this election cycle, I'm an enemy of certainty. So you tell me something's a done deal and I'm going to question it. This is an unprecedented, well, I don't know, unprecedented. We haven't seen something like this, Mark, in a long time. And so until those delegates vote on the floor, until we know there are not any pockets of resistance that flare up into something more, I'm not going to say it's over, but she did move really swiftly to lock down the endorsements of key Democrats. I talked to a delegate in Nevada yesterday that last week was telling me it was Joe Biden or nothing, and how upset she would be if Biden, stepped aside. And yesterday, the delegate, very nice woman, knocking on doors, working really hard for the president, just said, "No, look, I'm all in for the vice president. I'm, as a delegate, voting for her." So I'm not surprised to see things turn this way, but let's just see what happens in Chicago before we declare this a definite fait accompli as opposed to a likely fait accompli.
Exactly. That is predictable eloquence from David M. Drucker. Enemy of certainty. It should be a hashtag. It should be a T-shirt. Didn't you have on Twitter just a couple of days ago, it says, the one thing we cannot say is, well, let's just go back to the last time this happened.
Yeah, and that's the thing is in American history, we can go back to all sorts of political upheaval. I mean, obviously LBJ stepping aside in 1968. We used to live in an era, well, I never lived in this era, but I've read about it, where parties were actually strong and they got together and they chose the nominee, as opposed to, these series of primaries and caucuses where there's voting and the parties are, basically ballot access organizations. Here we're seeing the Democratic Party, for the first time in a long time, any party exercising the power it actually does have to select a nominee at this level. Pushing a sitting president out and ushering in a replacement candidate. So just something we haven't seen in decades, and that's why it's hard to just go back a few years and say that maybe it'll work like this because that's how that went, because we just haven't seen it in so long.
Let me ask you something along the lines of a category called "Be careful what you wish for." Conservatives can say we hounded Joe Biden from the campaign trail. I would suggest that Kamala is at least a smidge harder to beat. Now the drumbeat is to get Joe to perhaps resign the presidency itself. I can see the logic for that, obviously. I mean, look at him, if you can. But then she becomes the incumbent and maybe even a smidge harder to beat. So am I overanalyzing? What have these developments in the last few days done for Trump's chances?
Yeah, well, look. It's hard to say that any piece of analysis is wrong. I will say I remember right after that debate on June 27th, I was in the spin room, which was a basketball arena, and so the entire floor of this arena on the campus of Georgia Tech University was the spin room, and I was talking to a Republican consultant who was there, and he was telling me, well, Trump had such an amazing night, but if it pushes Biden out of the race, this could turn out to be the worst night of his campaign. Look, I think Trump is still very hard to beat. I think the vice president running against Trump does not mean that the Democratic Party's problems are over. She has her own unique vulnerabilities and weaknesses. He has right now some really good strengths. But the one thing with her that was not the case with Biden is that even if she loses, and then we go back and say, well, it's because she couldn't overcome this problem or that problem, all of her potential problems or existing problems are theoretically, you're able to overcome them. The president's problem is something you can't overcome, and that is age and infirmity. I mean, you can't cheat God, and that's one of the reasons why he agreed to step out of the race, is because that's what the polling was showing him, is that he was not going to be able to overcome this because, well, he can't. She has an opportunity to overcome her potential vulnerabilities and her existing ones. But look, she's younger. It's a better contrast. If she runs a good campaign with an attractive message, it's a much more competitive race than it had turned out to be with the Biden-Trump rematch. And so we're just going to have to see how this goes.